When I returned to work after maternity leave, I thought things would be easier with my mom, a nurse, volunteering to take care of the kids. But things weren't as simple as I thought. We found ourselves in a heated argument about the cost and value of childcare. The situation became even more tense when my husband asked my mom to go back to her old job with a salary I felt was too low. But can I really let my mom do this job without paying her fairly? It was always a challenge trying to balance our intense careers with family life. My husband and I, both busy professionals, never really discussed the details of having a second child until I found myself pregnant with our second daughter. At first, I was happy with our first child and felt content with the life we had built. But my husband, a lawyer with a demanding schedule, had always dreamed of expanding our family. He was persistent, expressing how much he wanted our daughter to have a sibling. Eventually, I agreed, knowing that the timing would be right for us to manage. The arrival of our second daughter was, of course, a joy. However, the reality of raising two young children while keeping up with our careers was proving to be far more complicated than I had expected. After my maternity leave, it became evident that I couldn't juggle everything on my own. My husband was constantly away at work, often dealing with long hours, and while I worked hard as an engineer, I couldn't focus entirely on both my job and the children. That's when I turned to my mother. She had always been supportive, and being a nurse, she had flexible hours. Though she had retired, I knew she still had the strength and patience to care for the kids. I felt confident that she could step in and take care of them full-time while we were both at work. The idea seemed perfect. I didn't want to burden her, but it made sense. After all, she was their grandmother, and who better to care for them than family? I had expected her to do it out of love, but I also wanted to ensure that she was compensated fairly for her time. My mom had left her job as a nurse to help us, and though I knew she was happy to be with her granddaughters, I didn't want her to feel taken advantage of. So, I did some research into the costs of childcare in our area and came up with what seemed to be a fair amount, $3,000 a month for both children. This was in line with the fees charged by local daycares, which also included cooking and occasional transportation. When I presented this idea to my husband, I thought he'd understand. After all, we could afford it. He made 140 kalers a year and I earned 110 kalers, which together gave us a comfortable living. However, his reaction was far from what I expected. He was taken aback by the cost and immediately started questioning why we needed to pay her that much. "It's just childcare," he said. "Why should we pay so much when it's her own grandkids?" His words stung, and I felt a growing sense of unease. Was I asking too much? Over the next few weeks, the issue grew into a larger point of contention. He continued to complain about the expense, even when I showed him the going rates for daycare and explained that it was a reasonable amount considering how much help my mom provided. But he remained unconvinced, insisting that the situation was getting out of hand and that we were overpaying for something that was supposed to be a privilege for her, not a job. The more we argued, the more frustrated I became. I couldn't understand why he couldn't see the value in paying my mom fairly for the work she was doing. She wasn't just a grandma helping out. She was taking on the full responsibility of caring for our children while we worked. To me, it wasn't just about paying for childcare. It was about respecting her time and effort. But my husband wouldn't back down, and I was left feeling stuck between the needs of my children, my mother's well-being, and my own desire to keep things fair. The tension between us was growing, and I knew that we couldn't keep ignoring the issue forever. After weeks of constant disagreements about the cost of paying my mother for childcare, I decided to look into daycare options. It became clear that the situation we had with my mom wasn't sustainable. Although I had hoped my husband would eventually come around to the idea of paying her fairly, the tension between us only grew, and I realized something had to change. Finding a daycare wasn't easy. Most of the local facilities had long waiting lists, and the ones that were available seemed inadequate compared to what my mother was offering. None of them provided the same level of care that she did. Cooking for the children, picking them up, and making sure they were constantly engaged and well taken care of. I could see why my husband thought that paying my mom $3,000 a month was too much. But I was frustrated that he didn't understand that the cost of daycare would be comparable, and it wouldn't come with the extra benefits my mother was offering. Eventually, I managed to secure spots for both children at a nearby daycare that could accommodate our schedule. The fees were steep, $1,000 to $1,800 per child, which was more than we had anticipated. We had no choice but to make the switch, and although I knew it was the right thing to do, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. The daycare wasn't going to provide the same personal touch that my mom had. The children would be exposed to a larger group of kids, and there would be no one who would cook for them, something my mom had always done. I worried about how they would adjust to the change. The first few weeks were rough. Both of the girls struggled with the transition. They would cry when we dropped them off, and the daycare wasn't as flexible as my mom had been. There were no personal updates throughout the day, and I missed the constant communication my mom had provided. It felt like something important was missing, and the kids seemed to sense it too. They became sick almost immediately, something I had never had to deal with when my mom was watching them. In the span of 2 months, our entire household had caught colds 3 times, something that had never happened before. The endless cycle of sickness was exhausting, and it didn't help that I was constantly trying to stay on top of my work. But the worst part came during one of my business trips. I had been away for just a few days, and as expected, my husband had to pick up the children from daycare. He had always been a bit scattered with time, and this time it cost us. He was late, and the daycare charged us a $75 late fee. I couldn't help but think about how different things had been when my mom was taking care of them. She would have never charged us extra for a late pickup. She understood how hectic our lives were. The late fee felt like a small but significant reminder of all the little inconveniences we were now dealing with that we hadn't faced when my mom was helping out. As the weeks passed, the frustration between my husband and I only intensified. He kept bringing up how expensive daycare was, and I couldn't help but feel that he hadn't truly understood the full scope of the costs, emotionally and financially. I found myself wondering if we were better off sticking with the solution that had worked before, even if it meant paying more for it. But I knew my husband wasn't willing to budge on that front, and the more I thought about it, the more it became clear that we were at an impasse. The growing tension between my husband and me was becoming unbearable. Every day, it felt like the argument about my mom's role in our children's lives was consuming our conversations. He was still angry about the cost of daycare, but now he was focused on one thing: getting my mom to come back and take care of the children for the same $3,000 amount we had paid her before. He couldn't seem to understand why I was so adamant about paying her fairly, especially when it was clear to me that she wasn't just helping us out of kindness. She was doing a job, and a demanding one at that. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, my husband brought up the topic again. He was angry, his face flushed, as he declared that the only solution to our childcare issue was for my mom to return. "She's family," he said. "She should be helping us without making us pay so much. It's not like she has a real job anymore." His words struck me, and I felt the weight of his frustration pressing down on me. I had tried to explain to him multiple times that my mom had bills to pay and needed to save for her own future, but it was as if he wasn't listening. To him, the idea of paying her more than what we had agreed upon was just absurd. I felt my patience wearing thin, but I knew I had to keep my composure. This wasn't just about the money, it was about respect. My mom had sacrificed her career as a nurse to care for our children, and I couldn't let my husband dismiss her contribution so easily. So, I tried to have a calm conversation with him. I explained that if we wanted her back, we needed to pay her what she was worth, especially considering she could be making far more working part-time as a nurse. She was earning $4,300 a month at her previous job, and I didn't think it was fair to expect her to go back to a job that paid significantly less than what she could make elsewhere. But as soon as I brought up her potential earnings, my husband's face hardened. "You're not listening," he snapped. "This is a grandmother looking after her grandchildren. It's a privilege, not a job. We shouldn't be paying her like we're hiring someone off the street. I could feel the frustration rising in me, but I tried to stay calm. It's not about privilege, I said. It's about fairness. She's not just babysitting. She's cooking for them, taking them to activities, managing their schedules. It's a full-time job. Despite my best efforts, he wasn't hearing me. The argument grew louder, and I could feel the strain on our relationship. Every time we talked about it, we were further apart. I was stuck between wanting to do what was right by my mom and not wanting to lose my husband in the process. But my mind was made up. I wasn't going to let my mom go back to a job that undervalued her, and I wasn't going to let my husband's complaints dictate the situation any longer. But as the days went on, it became increasingly clear that my husband wasn't ready to let go of the idea of bringing my mom back at a lower cost. He was determined to make it happen, no matter the price. This wasn't just about childcare anymore. It was about who held the power in our relationship and how we would navigate these difficult decisions as a family. The question of whether we could find a compromise or if our differences would drive us further apart was looming larger than ever. The tension between my husband and me had reached a boiling point. We couldn't seem to agree on anything anymore. He was relentless in his demands, convinced that bringing my mom back to take care of the children for a lower cost was the only solution. Every conversation we had about it seemed to end in frustration, with no resolution in sight. One night, after a particularly heated argument, I decided to take a step back and think about the situation more objectively. Maybe we were both too entrenched in our own positions to see the bigger picture. So, I asked myself, was I being unreasonable? Was I being too hard on my husband for not understanding the value of paying my mom what she was worth? Or was he right in thinking that we were overpaying for something that could be done for less? The thought gnawed at me, but every time I considered his point of view, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. My mom wasn't just doing a simple job. She was offering invaluable support that allowed us to keep our careers while ensuring our children were well taken care of. I spoke to my mom again, trying to gauge how she was feeling about everything. She had been caught in the middle of all our arguments, and I could tell that the situation was starting to weigh heavily on her. "I don't want to cause any more problems," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I just want to help you both." But I knew that she wasn't being fully honest with me. I could tell she was hurt by my husband's comments, and I hated that she was being treated this way. My mom was always selfless, and all she wanted was to support us without being made to feel like she was imposing on us. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't keep putting my mom in this difficult position. I knew she would do anything for her granddaughters, but I couldn't stand the idea of her sacrificing her own well-being just to avoid conflict. I needed to make it clear to my husband that the issue wasn't just about the money, it was about respect, boundaries, and fairness. The next time we sat down to talk, I was determined to make him see things from my perspective. I calmly laid out the facts. We could afford to pay my mom a fair wage for her time and effort, and we should value her contribution to our family. I also pointed out that paying her a fair amount didn't just benefit her, it benefited all of us. By compensating her properly, we were ensuring that she wouldn't feel resentful or taken advantage of, and that we wouldn't have to worry about her wanting to leave or feeling undervalued. But my husband wasn't ready to budge. "I just think you're being too emotional about this," he said, his voice dismissive. "You're making it about money when it should be about family." That was the breaking point for me. I had spent months trying to make him understand, but it seemed like he wasn't willing to listen. I stood up, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me, and said, "This isn't just about money, it's about fairness. I won't let my mom feel undervalued, and I won't let you dictate what she should be paid. We need to figure this out together." The conversation ended there, and I knew we were at an impasse. The tension between us was palpable, and I could see that we were both exhausted from the constant back and forth. But as much as I hated it, I knew this wasn't going to be an easy fix. It wasn't just about childcare or money, it was about something much deeper. Trust, respect, and how we were going to navigate our family's future together. Days passed, and the unresolved tension between my husband and me lingered, a constant undercurrent in our home. We had reached a breaking point, each of us standing firm in our beliefs, and I knew that something had to change before it tore us apart. The issue with my mom's compensation had gone far beyond just childcare. It was a matter of principle, respect, and fairness. The deeper I dug into the situation, the more I realized that we weren't just arguing about money. We were arguing about how we viewed family, sacrifice, and support. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat down with my husband. The house was quiet, the girls already asleep, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like we had a moment of peace. I knew that if we didn't resolve this issue soon, it would only get worse. My mom was caught in the middle of our conflict, and I couldn't bear to watch her suffer from all the tension. I had to make my husband see the bigger picture, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths. "I've been thinking," I started, my voice calm but firm, "about what this is really about. It's not just about paying my mom. It's about how we value family and how we see the people who help us, who sacrifice for us. You have to understand that she's not just helping us as a grandmother, she's taking on a full-time job, managing our household, and ensuring our kids are safe and happy. If we can afford to pay her fairly, why shouldn't we?" He looked at me, his jaw clenched, clearly not wanting to admit that I was right. "It's just too much," he said, his voice rising. "I feel like we're being taken advantage of. She's family, not some hired help." I could feel my frustration growing, but I kept my composure. "It's not about being taken advantage of," I replied. "It's about respecting her time and effort. She has bills to pay, she needs to save for her future, and she deserves to be compensated for the work she's doing. We can afford it, and we should be willing to pay her what she's worth." There was a long pause as he processed my words. I could tell he was torn. He had never been one to fully embrace the idea of paying family for help, especially when he saw it as something that should be done out of love and duty. But I had made my decision, and I couldn't back down now. This wasn't just about the money. It was about ensuring that our family dynamics were healthy and sustainable in the long run. "I don't want to fight about this anymore," he said finally, his tone softening. "I know it's important to you, but I still don't think we should pay her that much. I'll try to understand your point of view, but I'm not sure I can fully agree." It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a start. The conversation had shifted from angry accusations to a more reflective tone, and that alone was a small victory. I knew that we were still far from agreeing on the issue, but at least now there was room for compromise, even if it was a fragile one. I could sense that, deep down, he cared about my mom and wanted what was best for our family, but his stubbornness was still holding him back. I walked away from the conversation feeling drained, but hopeful. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew that we couldn't continue down the path we were on. If we were going to make this work, we needed to find a way to come together, not just for our children, but for each other. The question of how we valued family and support was still unresolved, but at least we were no longer stuck in an endless cycle of blame and frustration. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe a little easier, knowing that the conversation wasn't over yet.